You walk into the house and something happens before you've decided anything. It's the ceilings, or the light, or the way the kitchen opens into the living space in that particular way you've always wanted, but never quite articulated. You move through the room slowly, and somewhere in the middle of that walkthrough, before you've asked about the taxes, before you've thought seriously about what the payment would mean, you've already made the decision. You feel it before the thought arrives. This is it. And then the thought arrives. How do you explain to someone who asks that this house just feels right? Hello, I'm Lincoln, and most people don't realize this when they're buying. But the house they choose is rarely just about the house. Let's start with the feeling, because it deserves to be taken seriously before it's examined. The pull toward a particular house isn't irrational. The desire for a home that matches who you are, or who you've been working to become, is real. It's connected to something genuine, the years of work, the income you've earned, the particular version of your life that you've been building toward. When a house shows up that looks like the physical expression of all of that, the response makes sense. It's not vanity, it's the recognition of something. But there's a layer underneath the recognition that's worth looking at. Because the house isn't just matching who you are, it's also matching who you want to be seen as. And those two things, who you are and who you want to appear to be, are not always the same. They're close enough that the distinction is easy to miss. And expensive when it does get missed. What version of yourself does the house you want represent? Think about how the justifications land when you're standing in a house slightly above what you planned. We'll grow into it. Our income is going to keep rising. This is a forever home, and a forever home is worth stretching for. Real estate appreciates. We're not throwing the money away. We've been careful for years, and we deserve something that reflects that. Every one of those thoughts is understandable. Some of them are even accurate. Income does tend to rise. Properties do tend to be appreciated. Being careful for years is real and earns something, but notice that none of those thoughts addresses the specific question of what the stretch actually costs. Not the additional payment, what the additional payment does, what it removes from the available options in the years that follow. What it costs not in dollars, but in room. The justifications arrive quickly. They have to because the pull is strong and the rational objection has to be neutralized before the feeling dissipates. And they work because each one is defensible and none of them is entirely wrong. Together, they complete the permission structure that allows a status decision to feel like a financial one. You only notice this later, when the permission structure has already been used. And here is the specific thing about identity purchases that makes them different from ordinary ones. The emotional logic of the purchase continues to operate after the purchase is made. The house that felt like a rival keeps generating the feeling of arrival, which keeps justifying the stretch, which keeps deferring the moment of honest accounting. By the time the accounting arrives, when the payment has been leaving for 18 months, and the margin is thinner than anticipated, the decision is already the house, and the house is already who you are. Let me draw a picture of what's actually happening in that moment. Imagine a scale. On one side, there's the life the house will require you to maintain. The payment, the taxes, the standard, the upkeep of a certain version of yourself that the house represents. On the other side, there's the freedom to change, to absorb disruption, to say yes to something uncertain, to hold space for a version of your life that hasn't fully shown itself yet. Most people, looking at that scale before they close, don't see it as a scale. They see the left side as the goal and the right side as the absence of something they'll eventually have. The freedom feels theoretical. The house feels real. What changes in the years after closing is that the right side becomes real too. The disruption arrives. The opportunity appears. The uncertain thing that would have required room you no longer have, becomes concrete. And by then, the scale has been set. The weight is on the left side, and it isn't moving. Here is a story. His name is Marcus. He'd been earning well for several years. building toward a purchase that matched his professional level, the neighborhood his colleagues lived in, the kind of house that said something specific when he mentioned where he'd bought. He got it. The house was genuinely good, right neighborhood, right size, the kitchen he'd wanted. He stretched to the edge of what the income could sustain. But the bank approved it, and his financial planner didn't object, and by any standard measure of the decision, it was reasonable. 3 years later, a former colleague reached out. They were putting together something, a small company, early stage, the kind of thing Marcus would have considered seriously before the house. The risk was real. The upside was also real. 12 months of reduced income while they established the footing, and then equity that might mean something. Marcus sat with it for a week. He ran the numbers and arrived at the same place every time. 12 months of reduced income wasn't survivable inside his current financial structure. The mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the baseline the house required. The numbers didn't leave room for a bet that might not pay off. He passed. The company did well, not spectacularly, but meaningfully. He watched it from the outside. He doesn't talk about this. But the house he bought to show he'd arrived also closed off one of the more significant doors he'd had available. What opportunities have you stopped considering because the structure of your life doesn't have room for them? Most people aren't buying a house. They're buying proof they've become who they were supposed to be. That sentence is worth sitting with, because it explains something that pure financial analysis can't. It explains why people stretch beyond what the math recommends. Why the house in the better neighborhood gets chosen over the house with better margins. Why the feeling of this is it overrides the calculation of what this will cost. The purchase isn't primarily about shelter or even investment. It's about identity. It's about finally having something visible that matches the internal story you've been telling about where you were heading. And identity purchases are expensive in a specific way that's different from ordinary expenses. Ordinary expenses can be reduced when circumstances change. You can cancel subscriptions, cut back on dining, revise the vacation budget. But the identity purchase, the house that represents who you've become, is much harder to walk back from. It's not just a financial position. It's a statement about yourself that you'd have to publicly revise by selling, downsizing, choosing something that says less. So people stay. Inside a structure that requires them to sustain a version of themselves that may no longer fit the life they're actually trying to live. This is the specific cost that doesn't appear on any mortgage application. Not the payment. The immobility. The way the identity purchase makes it harder to make a different statement without it feeling like a retreat. Without it feeling like you're telling a different story about yourself than the one the house was supposed to confirm. Now a different version. Her name is Sophie. She was buying the same year as Marcus in the same general market with a similar income. She looked at the houses he was looking at and felt the same pull. The neighborhood, the ceilings, the kitchen that said something about who she was. She bought below it. Not dramatically below. She didn't deprive herself. She found something that was genuinely good, but didn't carry the full weight of statement making. The neighborhood was slightly less the neighborhood. The kitchen was functional, but not impressive. She paid less than she could have, and in the first year, she was occasionally aware of the gap between what she'd bought and what she'd considered. Then her company went through a significant restructuring. Her role was eliminated, the kind of event that, for someone inside Marcus's financial structure, would have been an immediate crisis. The payment doesn't wait for you to find the next thing. And the next thing often takes longer to find than you expect. For Sophie, the restructuring was a serious problem and not a crisis. The difference is important. She had months, not weeks, to find the right next role. She could evaluate opportunities against what she actually wanted rather than against what her payment needed. She turned down 2 roles that would have been adequate. She waited for one that was genuinely good. She found it. The house was still hers. The life inside it had gotten harder for a period and had not broken. 5 years from now, you won't remember the difference between the neighborhoods. You'll remember what the structure made possible when you needed it to hold. Here's the part that's uncomfortable to name. The house you buy to prove something doesn't just cost you financially. It costs you a specific kind of interior freedom. The freedom to consider things that don't fit. The freedom to hold an uncertain period without the fixed point demanding resolution. The freedom to evaluate your life from a position of genuine choice rather than from the position of someone whose monthly obligations have already made most of the decisions. You don't feel that cost on the day you buy. The day you buy, the feeling is arrival. Life is about to become what it was always heading toward, and the house is the evidence. You feel it later, in the specific quality of the moment when something arrives that requires room and the room isn't there. In the negotiation, you settle too quickly because walking away isn't actually an option. In the risk you don't take because the downside now includes the house. In the version of yourself who would have made a different decision in a different financial structure. But who is making this decision in this one? You don't say any of this out loud. The people around you are probably in the same position, carrying the same quiet awareness that the structure has opinions about what they can do, and not saying it either because saying it would require a kind of honesty about the original decision that most people aren't ready for. But you feel it, in the body, before you can articulate it, in the specific weight of an opportunity that arrives when there's no room for it. The identity layer of a housing decision operates before the financial one. It's already made the choice by the time the calculator comes out. And the calculator, in most cases, is being used to confirm a decision that was already made, not to make it. But housing decisions are distinctive in one specific way. They create a structural consequence that compounds across years in ways most other purchases don't. The identity decision gets baked into the financial architecture of your life and then operates from inside that architecture, shaping the choices available to you for a decade. The house didn't just change where you live, it changed what you're optimizing your life around. Think about what that means, compounding forward. Every year inside a financial structure shaped primarily by an identity purchase is a year where the decisions available to you are filtered through that structure. The career moves, the geographic choices, the periods of uncertainty that would be survivable with room and aren't survivable without it, all of it passes through the structure first. Most of it still passes through, but not as cleanly. And some of it doesn't pass through at all. 1 decade in, the divergence between someone who bought for margin and someone who bought for status isn't dramatic in the visible ways. Both may have houses that have appreciated. Both may have careers that have continued. But look at the texture of the decade, the decisions that were made, the risks that were taken, the opportunities that were evaluated seriously versus the ones that closed before they were fully considered, and the difference becomes real. The margin person's decade has more in it, more turns taken, more periods of genuine uncertainty survived, more instances of negotiating from choice rather than from need. The status of a person's decade is not a failure. It's often genuinely good, but it's narrower. And the narrowing happened so gradually that it barely felt like narrowing at the time. It felt like maturity. It felt like responsibility. It felt like the natural progression of a life that had commitments now, which was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The question is not whether you should buy a house that represents something. Of course, the house should feel like yours. Of course, it should be connected to the life you've built and the person you've become. The desire for a home that means something is not the problem. The question is whether the house you're drawn to is the house that matches who you are, or whether it's the house that matches who you want to appear to be. And whether the distance between those two things, if there is distance, is a gap you can afford to carry for a decade. Because the house that proves something will cost you later, not necessarily in the house itself. In what it quietly removes from the version of your life that exists around it. The statement gets made, the proof lands, and then the life that was supposed to come after the proof still has to be lived, inside a structure that was shaped more by what you needed to show than by what you needed to sustain. That's the question worth carrying into the next showing. Not, does this house feel like me? But, does this house leave room for who I'm still becoming?